Hey guys, tonight we're heading back about 5,000 years to a land where rivers curl through golden plains, ziggurats cast long shadows over clay brick cities, and the world's very first receipt was probably issued by a sleepy scribe who just wanted to go home early. You're standing in ancienter, deep in the cradle of civilization summer, southern Mesopotamia. It's a sweltering afternoon, and the narrow alleys buzz with the chatter of traders, temple workers, and dusty children chasing goats. The air smells like sun-baked mud, sweat, and something very barley adjacent. You're squinting in the heat, trying to read a scribbled tablet someone shoved in your hands, except it's not scribbled at all. It's carved, and it's a receipt. Yes, this is the story of how humanity's insatiable need to track lentils, goats, and beer led to one of the most quietly revolutionary inventions of all time, the receipt. Your modern wallet owes its entire junk drawer of crumpled paper to the ancient Sumerians. You probably won't survive this ancient marketplace without one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling social, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where and when folks are listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. Together. You begin by strolling through the main road of which isn't much wider than a modern alleyway. The walls of the homes and shops are a dusty reddish brown, sun-dried bricks stacked one on top of the other, smooth with age and fingerprints. Traders shout offers in languages you don't understand, but the tone is clear by this now, or your neighbor will. Tables are stacked with dates, onions, textiles, and fish that have maybe seen better days. A man with a beard so long it might have its own personality waves you over to a stall, packed with clay jars. He gestures to a large pot. You don't need Sumerian to know he's talking about beer. You nod. He nods and he reaches under the stall, not for change, but for a piece of damp clay and a little stick. That's right. He's making you a receipt. Receipts were not a luxury in ancient summer, they were a necessity. Unlike in many parts of the world where bartering was casual and ephemeral, summer was dense with cities, temples, and tax collectors. Everything was counted. Everything was owed. Everything needed proof. If you wanted to remember that you paid 3 goats for 5 jars of fermented barley water, you better write it down. But of course, paper doesn't exist yet. Instead, the people of turn to the most abundant material they have, clay. Clay is cheap, moldable, and once dried or baked, practically immortal. So naturally, it becomes the foundation of history's first bureaucracy. Instead of ink, they use a sharpened reed called a stylus, which punches tiny wedge-shaped marks cuneiform into soft clay. The tablet the beer vendor hands you is small enough to fit in your palm. It's warm from the sun, and the symbols carved into it are almost abstract at first glance, but to a trained eye, this is a complete transaction. Buyer, seller, item, quantity. It's official. And yes, this means that if you had terrible handwriting in ancient summer, you probably just had terrible wedge-forming skills, which is arguably worse. Historians still argue whether these early tablets were meant primarily as memory aids or as legal records to be referenced in disputes, but either way, they became integral to Sumerian life. The city's scribes, respected professionals trained in specialized schools, are constantly at work. They're not writing poetry. Well, sometimes they are, but more often they're creating receipts, contracts, ration lists, and inventory tallies. The scale is impressive, entire walls filled with clay tablets recording grain allotments, livestock exchanges, and temple offerings. You wander deeper into the city and pass by the temple complex. Massive structures dedicated to the gods, but also to the gods of order, storage, accounting, and logistics. The temple isn't just a religious center, it's also the economic heart of the city. Goods flow in and out, and every single one gets documented. It's surprisingly soothing. Actually, this meticulousness, the hum of commerce, the tap-tap of styluses on clay, the rustle of straw baskets filled with onions. You stop to watch a scribe press symbols into a tablet for a man who's just handed over a string of dried fish. There's no shouting. No haggling, just calm, dusty efficiency. One fringe theory even suggests that some receipts doubled as teaching tools practice tablets for young scribes learning how to balance accounts and avoid misspelling barley with their stylus. You imagine ancient schoolchildren sighing over clay homework, their frustrated wedge marks lopsided from haste. But receipts also had more human moments. Some include notes about quality: this goat was especially fat, this batch of beer unusually weak. Some even add a little praise or complaint, the ancient equivalent of a Yelp review, complete with passive aggression. 3 jars of oil, seller was late. The more you look, the more you realize these aren't just documents, they're little time machines. Each one is a snapshot of a moment. Who needed what, who paid whom, what was valued and what was begrudgingly accepted as part of the deal. And while it might seem boring on the surface, there's something deeply peaceful about it, predictable, countable. Someone was here, long before you, trying to make sense of a chaotic world by writing. 2 sheep, 3 baskets of dates into wet clay, and thanks to Sumerian climate and their passion for baking clay tablets in communal kilns, we still have many of them. You're walking now through a narrow side street lined with pottery stalls, each one with a small clay tablet nailed to the wall beside the door. Some are cracked with age, others are fresh and soft. They're receipts but also signs of identity, credit records, maybe even wish lists. One tablet catches your eye. It's small, lopsided, and a little smudged. Someone's first receipt. Maybe someone learning to put order to the world. You tuck it into your pouch. Don't worry, the seller saw, and he'll be making a note of it. You're still in Ancienter, and the sun hasn't moved much overhead. It never seems to, does it? But the mood of the marketplace is changing. Merchants are rearranging their goods, calling out fresh prices, or just gesturing silently in the shared language of commerce. You turn down another side street, following the smell of freshly baked flatbread and maybe something faintly fishy, and find yourself staring at the Sumerian equivalent of a grocery store. This isn't a grand bazaar or a palace. This is just a stall with baskets full of barley, clay pots with lids tied on with woven reeds, and a very patient-looking man leaning against a pillar with a stylus tucked behind his ear. He's waiting, not for you to browse. There's no just looking in ancient summer, but to write. This is the beginning of the ancient marketplace economy, and with it, the rise of something oddly intimate, the first markets built on memory, trust, and eventually proof. Before writing, there were no receipts. There wasn't even an alphabet yet. So how did anyone keep track of what they owed? Bartering came first, and it was surprisingly complex. You might offer a goat for a sack of barley, or trade a woven tunic for 2 pots of honey. You might throw in a little fish oil to sweeten the deal. But how would you remember that you were owed 1 more pot of honey next week? You wouldn't, not without a system. Enter the earliest innovation in pre-receipt technology, keeping count, using the objects themselves. Sumerians would line up physical items: pebbles, shells, bits of shaped clay, each representing a specific good. You'd store those tokens in a leather pouch or a knotted cloth, and when it came time to settle up, you'd pull them out and go, "Look, I've got to go tokens and a beer token, and you owe me both." It was clever. It was tactile. It was also easy to lose. So next came something even better: clay tokens that represented abstract quantities and goods. Some were shaped like cones for grain, others like spheres or pyramids for livestock or textiles. These weren't toys. These were protodata, and they're considered by many scholars to be the first true accounting system. But things really changed when people began placing these clay tokens inside hollow clay balls called bully. That's right. They stuck the tokens into a globe of clay, sealed it up, and sometimes even pressed a seal into the outside so you knew who it belonged to. The result? A tamper-proof record, a freeze-dimensional, unopenable receipt. Of course, these clay spheres weren't perfect. If you wanted to check what was inside, you had to break them. And as you can imagine, that was a one-way journey. Historians still argue whether these bully were used mainly for tax collection, temple donations, or commercial trade. Some believe they were tied to seasonal harvests, helping the temple calculate offerings owed by local farmers. Others think they were contracts, literal balls of obligation. But whatever their exact purpose, they paved the way for something even more powerful, the symbol replacing the thing itself. Soon, scribes realized that instead of sticking the tokens inside the clay ball, they could just press the shapes onto the outside. It was faster, lighter, more permanent, and thus began the long road from 3D tokens to 2D writing. You stop to watch a merchant take a rounded bit of clay, flatten it gently in his palm, and press his stylus into the surface. His marks are quick but precise, vertical lines, small wedge-like, dashes, a few pictographs for goods, no numbers as we know them, just tallies and symbols. He adds his cylinder seal, his signature, and hands the tablet over. You've just witnessed the ancient version of a sales receipt, circa 3000 BCE. And yes, you heard that right, cylinder seals. These weren't just scribbles or finger smudges. Sumerians crafted elaborate, rolling stamps carved with animals, gods, and abstract patterns. Each one was unique, like a fingerprint in reverse. You'd roll your seal across a wet tablet, leaving an intricate signature behind, like a wax seal. On a medieval letter, it screamed, "This was definitely me." The artistry of these seals was no joke. Some were so finely carved that modern jewelers need magnifying lenses to appreciate the detail. One fringe theory even suggests that a person's social status was tied more to the quality of their seal than to their actual wealth. Imagine walking into a deal today and being judged not by your car or watch, but by how cool your signature stamp is. Receipts were evolving quickly. What began as simple clay impressions soon became full records. A sheep delivered, barley stored, oil distributed, sometimes even debts recorded with interest rates baked right in long before credit. Cards existed. You keep walking and the sound of trade fades slightly as you pass into a quieter part of the city, where temples tower and the scent of incense replaces that fishy tang from earlier. Here, receipts take on a different tone. Priests and scribes sit in the temple courtyard, carving records into tablets that will be stored in archives, wrapped in linen or sealed in jars. These aren't casual notes, they're the official memory of the city. Who donated what? Who owes whom? Who will pay next month? And some of those records still exist. Archaeologists have uncovered thousands of tablets in temple ruins, some perfectly preserved, others broken like shattered promises. One particularly well-known example records an order of beer for a religious festival, X units to be delivered by order of the high priest, a literal party receipt, timeless. What's most charming, though, is how ordinary some of these records are. You might expect grand pronouncements and epic declarations. Instead, you find scribbles about livestock feed, sick donkeys, and the weight of bricks delivered to a building site. Even the spelling errors, yes, Sumerian spelling mistakes show you that behind the styluses were real people, real hands, and probably real sighs of frustration. How many barley shipments today? Ugh, fine. Pass me the clay. And so here you are, in a world where receipts don't live in wallets or in mail folders. They live in mud, fire-hardened and eternal. Each one says, "This happened. We agreed. We remembered. And now you're remembering, too." You've wandered farther now, beyond the noise of the open markets, toward the quieter lanes lined with homes and storage rooms, small courtyards, where animals are tied up and baskets of grain are shaded beneath overhanging mats. Here, among the hum of daily life, you see something familiar, and yet ancient. A short man in a sweat-stained tunic is standing beside a stack of sealed clay jars, arguing not loudly, just with intensity, with a tall woman holding a stylus. They're not haggling over the goods. That part's been done already. They're arguing over quantities, over what was delivered, over what, frankly, needs to go into the record. And that's where your sleepy eyes open a little wider, because this quiet, precise moment of friction is exactly why the Sumerians invented receipts. You see, when trade scaled up from person-to-person bartering too large, organized delivery systems, temple rations, civic projects, military Provisioning memory wasn't enough. You needed something external, something neutral, something that could outlast a bad day or a long drought, something you could point to and say, "See, I did my part." And that's where clay, reeds, and cleverness came into play. We've already seen how the stylus, the humble reed pen, became the writing tool of choice. Cut at an angle, its tip pressed sharp impressions into soft clay. But here's where it gets interesting. The direction and depth of those impressions mattered. A vertical wedge might mean 1, while a horizontal wedge could mean 10. A small triangle might represent barley. A crescent shape could signal oil. Scribes weren't just carving, they were coding. And while the system evolved into cuneiform proper, complete with symbols representing syllables and words, it started here in the most utilitarian of ways. Not for poetry, not for prayers, but for counting things. One mainstream historical fact many people don't realize: the oldest known written document isn't a myth or royal edict. It's a receipt, specifically a record of a barley transaction. Written in cuneiform around 3000 BC, it's not dramatic, it's not majestic, it just says, essentially, so and so received X amount of barley over Y days, and it was baked into clay and kept possibly for years. There's a quiet beauty in that, don't you think? That the written word began not as storytelling, but as inventory, as proof. Now imagine yourself as a Sumerian merchant or a temple scribe, tasked with logging all the items flowing through your domain. You've got a big slab of wet clay, your stylus in hand, and a long line of people waiting to either collect or deposit goods. You lean over the tablet, pressing marks quickly but carefully. Each symbol locks into place with a satisfying little thunk. The clay squishes just slightly under your fingers. There's no backspace key here. Mistakes are fixed with your thumb and a heavy sigh. You write 20 containers of date wine, delivered by Eridu, son of Ninsun, stored in the western vault. Then you add the seal, yours or maybe the merchant's. One roll across the tablet leaves a band of tiny lions and wheat stalks, your personalized watermark. It's mundane work, but it's also powerful, because you are creating permanence. One quirky detail you'll appreciate: some scribes developed signature flourishes in their writing. A little curl here, an extra wedge there. It's the ancient version of dotting your I with a heart. And just like today, other scribes probably rolled their eyes. Ugh, there goes Lugal again with his dramatic Bala symbols. We get it. You're the Picasso of accountancy. But these flourishes sometimes help modern historians trace specific scribes. Across decades of tablets, the way someone carved a sheep symbol might be as unique as handwriting. It's oddly touching knowing that thousands of years later, we can still recognize a person's style. Historians still debate whether this early writing system arose purely from economic needs, or whether it also carried ritual significance. Some believe the temple scribes weren't just tracking grain, they were blessing it. That every symbol pressed into the clay also whispered to the gods, "We are watching, we are grateful, we are worthy." The divide between sacred and administrative was very thin in summer. Many temples doubled as storage houses. Many priests were accountants. Many receipts included both the physical and the metaphysical. 3 lambs for the feast. May in honor smile upon their flavor. You stroll farther now and see children squatting by the edge of a canal, poking little styluses into their own bits of clay. Their marks are chaotic, more doodle than document, but give them time. In a few years, they'll be logging tribute shipments and writing down arguments over oxen weight with the same casual precision. There's something strangely soothing about this world, isn't there? The methodical pace, the earthy materials, the universal desire to make things count, whether it's barley or beer, a loaf of bread or a borrowed donkey. The Sumerians saw value in writing it down, even when they didn't have an alphabet, even when every mark had to be invented, even when the clay cracked or the stylus split in half. They kept carving, kept counting, and you centuries later are now walking among their words. The wind shifts a little. You smell smoke from a nearby kiln, probably where today's batch of receipts is being hardened. Somewhere, someone is baking barley into bread while their wife tallies the ingredients with a stylus. And a scowl. Someone else is nervously waiting to see if their name ends up in a temple record or erased with a wet thumb dot, and you, well, you're just enjoying the journey, the squish of mud under your sandals, the gentle logic of tally marks, the comfort of knowing that if you ever forget how much oil you bought last week, there's a fired clay tablet somewhere that's got your back. You pause, lean against a cool brick wall, and exhale. The world is ancient. The numbers are simple. The record is clear. By now, you've walked the better part of past the bustling traders, into the quiet courtyards of homes and temples, and now, toward the outer districts where fields stretch toward the Tigris. Like a golden patchwork quilt, the pace slows. Out here, fewer voices, more birdsong. The Sumerian city never truly stops. But even the scribes take breathers when the sun is high and the ledgers are caught up. Mostly here, on the edge of the urban sprawl, you meet someone carrying a pouch not of coins. Because coins don't exist yet but of small, round clay tokens, she's a field agent of sorts, walking with purpose, sandals coated in dust, and a determined look that says, yes, I know exactly how many goats you said you had last week, because tonight, we're going to talk about tokens in pouches the strange, portable math kits that paved the way for receipts, long before the invention of writing. Before cuneiform tablets and styluses made their debut, Sumerians developed this highly tactile method of record-keeping. It wasn't quite a wallet, it wasn't quite an abacus, but it worked and it was revolutionary. Each token in the pouch represented a specific item. A cone might mean a small measure of grain. A sphere might mean a jar of oil. A cylinder? Perhaps a sheep or a goat. There was no one universal code local. Variations existed, but across the region, the general principle held. The shape equals the stuff. Imagine it like this. You're a shepherd. You deliver 6 goats to the temple. The temple clerk hands you 6 cylinder-shaped tokens, each pressed from clay and dried in the sun. You tuck them into your pouch. If someone tries to shortchange you next week, you show them the tokens. Boom. Proof. No reading required. Just counting. One mainstream historical fact here. These clay tokens date back as far as 8000 BCE. That's thousands of years before the first written language. Historians widely believe this token system is the precursor to writing itself, a visual, physical way to communicate value and obligation before language had letters. But there's a quirk, of course. These tokens were often stored in leather or woven pouches which, as you can imagine, weren't always the safest option. Things got lost, traded, miscounted. And so the next logical step occurred, sealing the tokens inside a clay envelope, known as a bulla. You picture yourself standing in front of a large table. You lay out 10 tokens, 5 for barley, 2 for sheep, 3 for beer. You carefully place them inside a ball of damp clay, seal it shut, and this is the cool part. You press the outside of the bulla, with impressions matching the tokens inside. In other words, the envelope now carries the label of its contents. Need to double check the contents? Easy. You can break it open. Just hope you don't need to use it again. This process token, pouch, bulla is humanity's earliest known filing system. These weren't receipts in the modern sense, but they served a similar function. Evidence of transaction encoded into an object you could carry or hand over. They even included signatures in the form of seal impressions, linking the record to a person, family, or temple. Of course, historians still argue whether these bullae were used more for public taxation or for private trade. Some think they were, issued primarily by temple institutions to track inventory or tribute, while others believe local farmers used them to show delivery of goods or payment of rent. Either way, they're fascinating, and more than a little mysterious, because many bullae have been found intact, never opened. Some scholars think they were never meant to be opened. They were symbolic. Once sealed, they were the agreement, a kind of trust fossil. Others argue that unopened bullae were simply forgotten or archived, not unlike the drawer full of receipts you've never once revisited. Now, imagine how confusing this system could get once trade began to boom. As summer cities expanded and temple economies swelled, so did the number of tokens, the complexity of deals, and the general chaos of trying to remember who owed what. And that's when someone had a bright idea. What if, instead of storing physical tokens, we simply drew them? You can almost hear the collective gasp from accountants across summer. But it made perfect sense. Why carry a dozen clay cones in your pouch when you could press 12 wedge marks into a tablet? Why risk losing a bulla when a flat piece of clay could tell the whole story? The birth of cuneiform writing wasn't just a technological leap, it was a philosophical shift. A moment when symbols began to represent not just things but concepts. When trade moved from handshakes to signatures, from sacks to tablets, from memory to permanent record. You pass a group of scribes sitting cross-legged in the shade, practicing. These very marks on small slabs of wet clay. One young boy frowns deeply as he tries to draw a sheep symbol. It comes out looking more like a broken ladder, but no one laughs. This is serious work. One wrong mark could mean the difference between 5 goats received and goats are 5, which, let's be honest, is a very confusing statement. It's easy to forget, in our world of PDFs and QR codes, just how radical this must have felt. Clay was everywhere in summer. Cheap, abundant, forgiving. You could mash it into any shape. Press your symbols and let the sun do the rest. Or, if you wanted extra durability, you'd fire it in a kiln, making your record nearly eternal. In fact, many modern historians jokingly thank the Sumerians for using clay instead of parchment or bark, because thousands of those tablets survived. They were buried, baked and forgotten, and now, centuries later, they're in museums and archives, still readable. Some even bear fingerprints. Maybe you've handled one without knowing it, walking through a museum on a quiet afternoon. A little grey slab in a glass case covered in tiny wedge marks. It doesn't shout for your attention. It doesn't look impressive. But it whispers. Someone once owed someone else 10 jars of beer. And that somehow is enough. You smile. Because somewhere in this ancient world, tucked into a clay pouch, carried beneath the arm of a weary scribe, is the future. One wedge mark at a time. By now, you've walked the better part of past the bustling traders, into the quiet courtyards of homes and temples, and now, toward the outer districts where fields stretch toward the Tigris. Like a golden patchwork quilt, the pace slows. Out here, fewer voices, more birdsong. The Sumerian city never truly stops. But even the scribes take breathers when the sun is high and the ledgers are caught up. Mostly here, on the edge of the urban sprawl, you meet someone carrying a pouch not of coins. Because coins don't exist yet but of small, round clay tokens, she's a field agent of sorts. Walking with purpose, sandals coated in dust, and a determined look that says, yes, I know exactly how many goats you said you had last week. Because tonight, we're going to talk about tokens in pouches the strange. Portable math kits that paved the way for receipts, long before the invention of writing. Before cuneiform tablets and styluses made their debut, Sumerians developed this highly tactile method of record-keeping. It wasn't quite a wallet. It wasn't quite an abacus. But it worked and it was revolutionary. Each token in the pouch represented a specific item. A cone might mean a small measure of grain. A sphere might mean a jar of oil. A cylinder? Perhaps a sheep or a goat. There was no one universal code local. Variations existed, but across the region, the general principle held. The shape equals the stuff. Imagine it like this. You're a shepherd. You deliver 6 goats to the temple. The temple clerk hands you 6 cylinder-shaped tokens, each pressed from clay and dried in the sun. You tuck them into your pouch. If someone tries to shortchange you next week, you show them the tokens. Boom. Proof. No reading required. Just counting. One mainstream historical fact here. These clay tokens date back as far as 8000 BCE. That's thousands of years before the first written language. Historians widely believe this token system is the precursor to writing itself, a visual, physical way to communicate value and obligation before language had letters. But there's a quirk, of course. These tokens were often stored in leather or woven pouches which, as you can imagine, weren't always the safest option. Things got lost, traded, miscounted. And so the next logical step occurred, sealing the tokens inside a clay envelope, known as a bulla. You picture yourself standing in front of a large table. You lay out 10 tokens, 5 for barley, 2 for sheep, 3 for beer. You carefully place them inside a ball of damp clay, seal it shut. And this is the cool part: you press the outside of the bulla, with impressions matching the tokens inside. In other words, the envelope now carries the label of its contents. Need to double check the contents? Easy. You can break it open. Just hope you don't need to use it again. This process token pouch bulla is humanity's earliest known filing system. These weren't receipts in the modern sense, but they served a similar function. Evidence of transaction encoded into an object you could carry or hand over. They even included signatures in the form of seal impressions, linking the record to a person, family, or temple. Of course, historians still argue whether these bullae were used more for public taxation or for private trade. Some think they were issued primarily by temple institutions to track inventory or tribute, while others believe local farmers used them to show delivery of goods or payment of rent. Either way, they're fascinating, and more than a little mysterious, because many bullae have been found intact, never opened. Some scholars think they were never meant to be opened. They were symbolic. Once sealed, they were the agreement, a kind of trust fossil. Others argue that unopened bullae were simply forgotten or archived, not unlike the drawer full of receipts you've never once revisited. Now, imagine how confusing this system could get once trade began to boom. As summer cities expanded and temple economies swelled, so did the number of tokens, the complexity of deals, and the general chaos of trying to remember who owed what. And that's when someone had a bright idea. What if, instead of storing physical tokens, we simply drew them? You can almost hear the collective gasp from accountants across summer. But it made perfect sense. Why carry a dozen clay cones in your pouch when you could press 12 wedge marks into a tablet? Why risk losing a bulla when a flat piece of clay could tell the whole story? The birth of cuneiform writing wasn't just a technological leap, it was a philosophical shift. A moment when symbols began to represent not just things but concepts. When trade moved from handshakes to signatures, from sacks to tablets, from memory to permanent record. You pass a group of scribes sitting cross-legged in the shade, practicing these very marks on small slabs of wet clay. One young boy frowns deeply as he tries to draw a sheep symbol. It comes out looking more like a broken ladder, but no one laughs. This is serious work. One wrong mark could mean the difference between 5 goats received and goats are 5, which, let's be honest, is a very confusing statement. It's easy to forget, in our world of PDFs and QR codes, just how radical this must have felt. Clay was everywhere in summer, cheap, abundant, forgiving. You could mash it into any shape, press your symbols and let the sun do the rest. Or, if you wanted extra durability, you'd fire it in a kiln, making your record nearly eternal. In fact, many modern historians jokingly thank the Sumerians for using clay instead of parchment or bark, because thousands of those tablets survived. They were buried, baked and forgotten, and now, centuries later, they're in museums and archives, still readable. Some even bear fingerprints. Maybe you've handled one without knowing it, walking through a museum on a quiet afternoon. A little grey slab in a glass case covered in tiny wedge marks. It doesn't shout for your attention. It doesn't look impressive. But it whispers. Someone once owed someone else 10 jars of beer. And that somehow is enough. You smile. Because somewhere in this ancient world, tucked into a clay pouch, carried beneath the arm of a weary scribe, is the future. One wedge mark at a time. You're still walking, and the afternoon heat of Ancienter has mellowed into a coppery glow. Shadows stretch long over the baked roads, and the scent of warm dust rises with each step. In the distance, you hear the faint ringing of bells, maybe, from a procession or a herd returning from pasture. But here, at the edge of the commercial quarter, things are getting serious. You've arrived at a table under an awning. not a fancy place, just a flat surface, a few clay tablets stacked nearby, a wooden box of styluses, and an object that carries more weight than its size suggests a small, cylindrical seal carved with lions and stars. The woman seated at the table doesn't look up when you approach. She's busy. She's recording a transaction. And the moment you see her roll the cylinder across a fresh tablet, leaving a looping trail of carved imagery, you understand why seals, signatures, and trust issues were such a big deal in ancient Sumer. Let's be honest, trust is hard. Even harder when everyone's bartering with goats and oil, and nobody has a last name. The Sumerians knew this, and so they came up with something better than promises. They invented proof of identity. Cylinder seals were like tiny printing presses, a few inches long, made of carved stone, and often drilled so they could be worn on a string around the neck. These objects were prized possessions. Each seal was unique. No two were alike. They were the equivalent of a personal signature, a family crest, and a credit card rolled into one. When you pressed one into wet clay, you weren't just decorating it. You were saying, "This is mine. This happened. I approve." A mainstream, historical fact worth chewing on: cylinder seals weren't only used by scribes and priests. Everyone who participated in trade or official business likely had one. Merchants, farmers, bureaucrats, temple staff, they all needed to sign documents, and they all did so with style. Literally dot the images on the seals. Oh, they were fabulous. Some had mythological scenes, gods battling monsters, winged bulls in mid-leap. Others were more personal, scenes of worship, agricultural motifs, animals chasing each other in looping designs. And then, of course, there were the braggy ones. Look at me, wrestling a lion while wearing a 5-tiered headdress. I'm the guy who sold you that barley. But seals weren't just about flair. They were about authenticity. A tablet without a seal was basically just a rumor. But a sealed tablet, that was official, immutable. The Sumerian version of signed, sealed, delivered. You kneel beside the woman at the tablet table. She's reviewing a list. Her stylus taps the clay gently, counting off quantities. You see the words forming: 3 baskets of onions, delivered by Enlil of the Northern District, approved by Lugal. And then that seal rolls through, adding a final flourish like a ceremonial wax stamp. Now here's where things get a little juicy. Because yes, naturally, seals could be faked. Enter the world of ancient forgery. Fringe theories suggest that as early as 2500 BCE, some ambitious scribes or merchants tried to copy the seals of others. A few experimental tablets even show seal impressions that seem off. The designs are sloppy. The spacing is weird. The lion looks more like a startled cow. Historians still argue whether these were actual attempts at fraud or just practice seals made by apprentices. But one thing is clear: even in Sumer, where there was bureaucracy, there was suspicion. That's why seals were often combined with written names. A tablet might say Enlil, son of Amarsin, and then carry Enlil's personal seal. This double layer text plus image offered extra protection. You couldn't just borrow your neighbor's seal and pretend to be him. You'd have to copy his writing style. To dot and yes, writing style mattered. Scribes developed recognizable handwriting even with cuneiform. The angle of the wedge, the depth of the stroke, the spacing between marks it all added up to a fingerprint of sorts. That's why archaeologists can sometimes identify which scribe wrote which tablet. Imagine leaving your font on clay for 5,000 years. That's oddly intimate. You step back and watch as another merchant approaches the tablet station. He's older, with dusty feet and the sunburned look of someone who's been measuring barley all day. He drops a small sack onto the table, clinks of ceramic tokens inside, and waits as the woman opens it, counts and begins to record. But instead of using her own seal, she pauses, looks at the man. He nods. She hands him the stylus. This is rare. Only when trust is mutual and the deal is delicate do both parties participate in writing. He presses a mark. Then she finishes the entry, signs her seal beside it, and passes the tablet to a boy sitting nearby. The boy takes it gently, as if holding something sacred, and walks it down the lane toward what must be a storage house. That tablet will be dried in the sun, maybe fired in a kiln, and then it'll live forever. Seals weren't only used on tablets. They also marked doorways, jars, and even bundles of goods. A delivery of fish might arrive tied with twine and sealed with clay. If the seal was broken, someone had tampered with it. If it was intact, the goods were fresh, trustworthy, and untouched. It's kind of comforting, really, that in a world without digital fingerprints or security codes, people still found ways to say, "This is mine, don't mess with it." You linger a little longer near the tablet desk, watching as another scribe rolls his seal with a bit of a flourish, yes. Some of them were dramatic about it and then pats the clay smooth with practiced hands. A small dog wanders past, sniffs your sandal, and continues on its way, unconcerned by the flurry of bureaucratic activity. You, meanwhile, can't help but think some of these records will outlast the buildings they're stored in, outlast the people who made them, maybe even outlast time itself, all because someone said, "I need proof I paid for those onions." And another person replied, "No problem, let me get my seal." The sun is setting now, casting long amber streaks over the rooftops of and the city is winding down in its own measured way. Street vendors pack up baskets. Temple bells ring softly in the distance, and the smell of cooking fires drifts through the arrow mix of roasted onions, lentils, and the faint yeasty tang of brewing beer. You follow the fading light toward a side building near the temple's edge. It looks modest at first, but inside there's a flurry of stylus tapping and focused, furrowed brows. You've entered the scribal court as a space where the true titans of Sumerian data wrangling operate, because tonight you're going to meet the unsung heroes of the ancient world, the scribes, also known as the cool nerds of summer. You might be picturing dusty old men hunched over tablets, but know these folks were a whole vibe. In a society where only a fraction of the population could read or write, scribes were elite. They were highly trained, highly respected, and in some circles mildly feared. You didn't mess with someone who controlled the written record of your debts. Picture it, a room filled with low benches, bundles of clay, reed styluses of various thicknesses, and piles of tablets in different states of completion. Young apprentices squat cross-legged on the floor, practicing standard wedge patterns in silence while their teachers check over their shoulders. It's not chaotic, it's focused, like a very, very dusty tech startup. You sit beside a young man named Unraveling. He's about 16, and he's having the worst day of his life. See, he's made a mistake on a delivery record. Instead of writing that his master received 40 containers of fish oil, he accidentally marked for 100. His face is the color of sun-baked terracotta. His hands are shaking, and his master, calm but visibly twitchy older scribe, is quietly making a new tablet, while muttering something that's probably not a blessing. Mistakes like this had consequences. If someone acted on the wrong information, rations could be miscounted, offerings over or undersupplied, or workers paid incorrectly. So even though the stakes weren't life and death, they were still serious, especially when the temples were involved. Still, you can't help but chuckle gently, of course, because it's such a human moment. Who among us hasn't copied the wrong number on a spreadsheet? Unraveling isn't doomed, though. He's still learning, and scribal training was no joke. From a young age, sometimes as early as 5, students learned to draw standard signs, copy dictation, recite number systems, and eventually compose full administrative records from memory. This place, known as the edible literally tablet house, was more than a classroom. It was where bureaucrats were born. One mainstream fact: being a scribe wasn't just about writing. It was about memory, mathematics, measurement, and judgment. A good scribe had to know complex metrology systems, how many shekels made a mina, how many containers of barley equaled a daily ration, how to convert raw materials into labor wages. There were no calculators, just the human brain, a stylus, and a whole lot of pressure. You watch as the elder scribe finishes correcting Unraveling's mistake. He smooths the tablet's surface with water and represses the proper numerals with calm, decisive hands. Then, Without scolding, he gestures for the boy to try again, and he does slowly this time. Meanwhile, another scribe across the room is working on a massive inventory tablet. It's for the temple kitchens. You overhear. It lists everything from wheat and garlic to beer and dried dates. The symbols are tiny, efficient, perfectly aligned. The man pauses, then reaches into a satchel and pulls out a seal. His is unusual, circular instead of cylindrical and carved with a sunburst. A mark of rank, maybe. Or a family tradition. French. Theory time. Some seals may have also indicated spheres of responsibility. Certain motifs show up more frequently in grain transactions, others in livestock trades. This isn't a confirmed fact, but scholars have long speculated that there may have been a kind of symbolic code. Think, oh, he's the guy with the fish seal. Must be from the docks. One tablet nearby catches your eye. It's older, cracked, with faded symbols, but it's special. It includes the name of the scribe himself. That's not common. Most receipts simply state the names of the parties involved. But here in the corner is a little flourish written by Dumuzi, son of Shubnin. Not a boast exactly, just a quiet note. I was here. I recorded this, and that hits differently, because while the contents of the tablet, something about 3 baskets of onions and 1 very grumpy goat, are utterly mundane, the presence of the scribe's name makes it feel personal, permanent, even a little proud. You picture Dumuzi placing the tablet on a drying rack, wiping clay from his hands and stepping outside into the evening sun, knowing that no one's going to question this transaction, not today, not ever, because it's written, it's sealed, it's real. Historians still debate how much creative license scribes had. Were they expected to stick strictly to formulas, or could they sneak in personal notes, little jokes or subtle jabs? Some tablets suggest that yes, at least occasionally, scribes indulge themselves. A famous example includes a ration list that ends with, "and 5 fish for the clerk who waited 2 hours in the sun." Passive-aggressive? Maybe. Honest? Definitely. As night begins to settle over her, the scribal quarters wind down. Students clean their styluses. Elders cover tablets with woven cloths, and a few candles are lit for late work. Someone hums a low tune, and someone else sneezes from the clay dust. You step out into the cool air, your mind buzzing with wedge marks and seal impressions. You may not have carved a receipt yourself today, but you've seen the process, the care, the skill, the occasional mistake, and it all makes sense now. Receipts weren't just about numbers. They were about people, people with responsibilities, tempers, handwriting styles, and dreams of not getting yelled at over fish oil. And in this world where the future was baked into clay, and trust was earned 1 wedge at a time, the scribes weren't just bureaucrats, they were artists. The moon is rising now, glowing faintly above the flat rooftops of her, and the streets have mostly emptied, but not entirely. A few late-night workers still shuffle along, carrying baskets or leading donkeys. Somewhere nearby, a lute hums faintly, in the hands of a tired musician, but you've wandered somewhere quieter still along. Low room lit by oil lamps, lined with shelves, not wooden shelves, brick ledges, stacked carefully with tablets, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, some wrapped in cloth, some tucked in reed baskets, and some simply laid bare to the world. You've just walked into the ancient version of a filing cabinet. Welcome to the Sumerian archive. If scribes were the recorders of the past, the archivists were its guardians. And tonight, we're going to explore how receipts didn't just exist, they were stored, sorted, and saved. It's easy to assume the past was chaotic, disorganized, casual. But this room proves otherwise. The Sumerians weren't just scribbling on clay and chucking tablets out the window. No, they had systems, and receipts were meant to last. You crouch near a low stack of tablets, and even in the flickering lamplight, you can tell these are not casual documents. They're orderly. They're part of a record chain. 1 tablet notes barley distributed 14th day, month of eating, and the next one confirms that barley was received. Each is marked with a seal, a date, and a location. This isn't just storage. It's accountability. Mainstream historians agree. Large institutions in ancient Mesopotamia, especially temples, and city-state administrations developed entire archival systems. They didn't just keep receipts, they referenced them. Some tablets even include notations like, as recorded in the earlier writing, or in agreement with the previous list. It's the Sumerian version of see email below. And if that seems impressive, just wait, because some of these records were indexed. Yes, indexed. Not alphabetically. Of course there was no alphabet yet, but by content type, location, or even responsible official. You'd have one shelf for grain deliveries, another for tax payments, another for building supplies. If someone disputed a record, you'd find the tablet, read it, and boom, problem solved. Unless the tablet had cracked, which, admittedly, happened a lot. That's why some archives included duplicate tablets. Not because the scribes were paranoid, because accidents happened. A dropped tablet could mean the loss of a season's barley record, so they'd often make a master copy and one or two backups. It wasn't quite cloud storage, but it worked. And when a tablet became outdated or irrelevant, you didn't throw it away, you buried it. Literally. Many archive rooms had tablet pits where old documents were ceremoniously retired, not because they were trash, but because they were finished. A job completed, a contract fulfilled. Into the pit they went, still whole, still legible, just no longer active. Fringe theory alert. Some scholars believe these tablet pits were also spiritual in nature, that by retiring a receipt, you were symbolically closing a debt, not just with another person, but with the gods. After all, the temples oversaw so much trade that economic obligations and religious duty often blurred. Now, back to the shelves. You reach for a tablet at random, don't worry, you're gentle and read its contents slowly. It's short, compact, efficient. Received. 1 donkey, delivered by Nana in service of temple kitchen. Witnessed by Lucian, stored in lower stables. That's it. But it says so much. Someone owned a donkey. Someone delivered it. Someone witnessed the delivery. Someone filed the receipt. And now, thousands of years later, you are holding the proof that it happened. There's a certain poetry in that. Imagine the ancient dispute. Hey, where's my donkey? Check the archives. Which shelf? Livestock? Lower tier? Third basket in. You can't help but smile. Because as odd as it feels to say, bureaucracy can be beautiful. Not because it's flashy or heroic, but because it lets civilizations remember themselves, 1 donkey at a time. Now, not every receipt made it into archives like this. Many were kept temporarily, just long enough for the deal to settle, the grain to be eaten, or the bricks to be stacked. But for important exchanges, taxes, temple tribute, rations, construction materials, these tablets were preserved. And yes, sometimes hidden. Historians still argue whether certain tablets were deliberately buried to protect them from theft, fire, or even changing political regimes. Some ancient cities under threat of invasion seem to have sealed their archives in clay jars or tucked them into foundation walls. The logic? If we fall, let someone in the future know we were here. Let the record survive, and survive they did. In places like Nippur and Uruk, entire cache sites of clay tablets have been uncovered, sometimes over 20,000 in a single dig. The majority, receipts, delivery logs, inventory lists, the boring stuff, the best stuff. Because here's the truth. While kings wrote about battles and poets sang of gods, receipts told the story of real life. How much fish people ate, how often they bathed, how many bricks went into a wall, who paid their barley tax on time, and who, let's just say, needed a reminder. These records weren't glamorous, but they were faithful. They didn't exaggerate. They didn't boast. They simply said, this happened. We agreed. I wrote it down. You set the tablet back in its place, carefully angled for airflow, and step back. Around you, the shelves stretch on a silent forest of memory. If you listened closely, maybe you'd hear whispers, voices of scribes long gone, murmuring about goat tallies and beer quotas, sealing tablets with a satisfied thunk, nodding to themselves in the lamplight, Or maybe it's just your imagination. But either way, you feel it now, that quiet Sumerian obsession, not with glory or conquest, but with accuracy, with keeping the receipts, with making sure the record speaks long after the voices fade. And tonight, as the lamps flicker and shadows curl around the corners of the room, you know one thing for certain: if the world ever ends, someone will find these tablets and know that once someone counted every last onion. You slip quietly out of the archive building, your sandals brushing softly over packed earth as the night deepens around her. The stars overhead scatter themselves across the sky. Like grains spilled from a careless scribe's basket, it's cooler now, the kind of gentle, dry night air that almost smells like dust and baked brick. As you wander the dim lanes, past sleeping goats and closed market stalls, you find yourself approaching another hub of life in this city, quiet now, but still warm with recent activity, the granary. A place where transactions didn't just get recorded, they were measured, weighed, and rationed with precision, because it's time we talked about grain quotas, daily rations, and the long line for lentils. You'd think a society built on temple worship and divine kingship would put more focus on poetry or war stories. But in truth, some of the most detailed and obsessively kept Sumerian records have to do with food. That's right, how much grain was harvested, where it went, how it was milled, who got fed, and how much dot. And if you're imagining someone shouting out numbers while tossing barley into baskets, you're not entirely wrong. But there's a whole mathematical ballet happening behind the scenes. You approach the back entrance of the granary and peek through a woven curtain. Inside, workers are tidying up from a long day. Empty baskets are being stacked, and a few scribes are seated on a raised platform, finishing up the day's accounting on small, palm-sized tablets. A flickering lamp makes their shadows dance across the wall. A mainstream fact you might enjoy: Sumerians developed one of the earliest known standardized systems of weights and measures, using objects like the shekel, a unit of weight, and the volume of grain. These units allowed for consistency across transactions, making receipts not just possible but trustworthy. Let's say you're a temple worker. Each day, you receive a ration of barley, maybe a silo or two, depending on your rank. The scribe watches as the barley is measured, poured into your bag, and noted down. You nod. The scribe presses the tally into a clay tablet, and on your way you go. Same again tomorrow. These weren't handouts, they were part of the labor economy. You worked for the temple fed you. You hauled bricks, here's your bread. You managed livestock, here's your goat ration. Even children working part-time weaving mats could earn their share of lentils or beer. Yes, beer. Let's pause on that, because beer wasn't just a luxury. It was part of the standard wage structure. In fact, some of the oldest pay stubs ever discovered are Sumerian receipts for rations of beer. A common entry reads something like: 1 worker, 5 silo of beer, 3 silo of barley, day 3, month of eating. The idea of getting a paycheck in beer might sound odd today, but it made total sense in an era when nutrition, hydration, and celebration all came in frothy, fermented form. And Sumerian beer wasn't served in pint glasses, it came in large communal jugs. People drank it with long straws to avoid the floating grain solids. You can picture it now: tired workers huddled at the end of a long day, sipping their liquid bread and swapping complaints about scribes with overly dramatic seals. Fringe detail: there was a difference between ration beer and festival beer. The good stuff was saved for religious ceremonies or royal visits. Ordinary laborers got the everyday brew, which was still nourishing, if less fancy. But how did the system keep from collapsing? How did they track who got what, and how often? That's where the grain tablets come in. Some of the most common Sumerian documents were long, rectangular tablets listing names, dates, and quantities. Imagine a payroll spreadsheet carved into clay. One row might list a man named Lugula and the 5 silo of barley he received. Below him, his wife Desilah, their children 1 each. Then the neighbor's cousin, the goat herder 2 streets down. All lined up, all recorded. You crouch beside a discarded tablet near the entrance and squint at the marks. This one's a copy of a ration distribution list. It even has a faint signature, probably the scribe sound, a seal you recognize, a little bird, flanked by fish. You remember that seal from earlier. So this tablet? It's from someone's ongoing record trail, part of a career built one barley receipt at a time. Historians still argue whether these ration systems were primarily administrative or served deeper religious purposes. After all, many food distributions were handled by temples, and the gods themselves were said to consume offerings. It's entirely possible that by feeding workers through the temple, the Sumerians saw themselves as channeling divine generosity. But let's not romanticize too much. There were lines, there were delays, and there were arguments. You overhear one now, two men by a side wall, quietly bickering over something. One insists his barley was short. The other, a tired scribe, gestures at a tablet and points to the marks. You got 5. I wrote 5. Your neighbor saw it. You'd think this would settle it. But no. The accused glares at the record, sniffs, and stalks off into the dark, muttering something unkind about the scribe's counting ability. Even in summer, people questioned the receipt, which brings you to an interesting twist. Some tablets were made with extra notes, little side marks indicating disputes. One famous example includes a phrase like, claimed by Ursag that only for Sila were received, denied by scribe, witnessed by Dumuzi. In other words, even ancient receipts had comment sections. It's strangely comforting to know that even 5,000 years ago, people questioned their bills, argued over portion sizes, and swore their sack was lighter than yesterday's. The night deepens. You rest on a bench near the granary, watching as the last scribe stashes his finished tablets in a reed basket. He yawns, stretches, and rubs his clay-stained hands on a cloth. Then he slings the basket over his shoulder and heads home past dark alleys and closed courtyards. Another long day of barley mouth behind him. You tilt your head back and look at the stars. Somewhere in the city, beer is still bubbling. Somewhere else, a woman is telling her husband he's eaten more than his share. Somewhere in a sealed archive, a tablet sleeps silently, waiting to prove someone's innocence or someone else's forgetfulness. And you're learning that in summer, you were only as honest as your last grain receipt. You wake the next morning. Well, you didn't exactly sleep, but if you had, it would have been to the gentle hum of barley carts and mourning doves, and the city of is already bustling again. The rooftops glow pink with dawn. Smoke curls up from breakfast hearths, and somewhere in the distance, a temple horn moans its way into the day. But today, instead of wandering through scribal quarters or barley piles, you're headed toward a quieter place. A place where receipts were not scratched into quick lists or delivery logs. No, this time, we're diving into something a little more official, a little more ceremonial. Legal records and contracts, aka when a receipt becomes a promise carved in stone. You approach a large public square with stepped benches around the edges, and at the center, a few small booths made of woven matting and wood slats. Scribes sit behind them with their clay, their styluses, and of course their seals. But this isn't your standard market inventory day. These scribes are waiting for contract clients, because while receipts were used to track goods, deliveries, and rations, they also became something more powerful, binding evidence of agreements. Want to rent a field for planting? There's a receipt for that. Want to sell your house to your cousin for 3 goats and a jar of sesame oil? Receipt. Want to guarantee your daughter's dowry or write up a labor agreement for your cousin's cousin who swears he'll finish the wall this time? Receipt. But once things got serious, it wasn't just a receipt. It was a contract tablet. You kneel beside one of the booths as a woman approaches with her brother. They're here to divide an inheritance, 1 field to oxen and a house with a leaky roof. The scribe listens, nodding slowly. He begins writing, carefully etching into clay names, family ties, property boundaries, the agreed-upon division of goods. One mainstream fact: the earliest known legal contracts dating back to around 2600 BCE come from Mesopotamia. They outlined sales, loans, rentals, and even divorce terms. Each one was carefully constructed, often including a date, witnesses, and, of course, those all-important seals. And here's where it gets interesting, because these weren't just written records, they were legal armor. A person who had their contract tablet could bring it to court or more often, to a temple official and say, "Look, here's the deal. It's written, sealed, and witnessed." And in many cases that was enough to settle the dispute. No shouting, no bribing, just clay. You peek at a finished contract lying nearby. It's short but precise. Luinana borrows 10 shekels of silver from Enlil's to be repaid in barley within 30 days. Witnessed by Kalbotu. Sealed by Luinana and Kalbotu. Short, clear. UNARGUABLE. But fringe fact? Not every contract was actually read by both parties. Literacy was still rare. Many participants could speak the agreement aloud, but relied on the scribe to interpret and record it. That's why witnesses were essential. They weren't just bystanders. They were protectors. They confirmed that what the tablet said was what everyone agreed to. And there's even evidence, historians still debate this, that public readings of contracts took place for especially important deals, like, say, a land transfer or a high-value livestock sale. The scribe would read the text aloud in a square like this one with the parties present, and the public would serve as a kind of early social accountability mechanism. You said you'd deliver the goat on the 17th. I heard it. You watch as another contract is finalized. The scribe smooths the clay edges and sets it aside to dry. Then he reaches for a curious object, a duplicate tablet, smaller and curved, meant to be stored with the buyer or renter. Yes, Sumerians used to part contracts. Sometimes the original was kept in a temple archive, while the counterpart was given to the citizen. And when disputes arose, they matched them up like puzzle pieces. If they aligned, case closed. The earliest known document matching technique. Take that, DocuSign. Now, let's talk about clauses. Sumerian contracts weren't just I give you X, you give me Y. Oh no, they included penalties, deadlines, conditions. You find one tablet that reads, if the barley is not returned by the harvest moon, borrower shall provide to goats in compensation. Another says, if the wall is not repaired by the 8th month, the worker shall pay in bricks and beer. Honestly, it's kind of poetic, like legal haiku with teeth. But these contracts weren't always cold and transactional. Some had touches of personality. You read one that ends with, witnessed by Shara. Who says this is a good deal? Another ends with, sealed in friendship. And your favorite, signed under the shade of the tamarisk tree. That's right. Some contracts included location details that weren't legally required, but added human context. They became snapshots of Sumerian life. You're not just reading a business deal, you're peeking into a moment between two people, under a tree, making a promise in clay. It makes you wonder how many of our modern agreements could be improved with a note like, signed on a sunny day with excellent bread rolls. You hear a chuckle from one of the scribes. A boy has just brought his older brother's contract tablet, now chipped on one corner. The scribe shakes his head, gently remolds the edge and adds the missing corner marks again. Even the most important documents had to battle goats, children, gravity just like anything else in summer. And that's the lesson today. Receipts weren't just dry records, they were tools of fairness. They allowed a world without digital tracking or central banks to function. They gave ordinary people, farmers, merchants, bricklayers a way to protect their agreements, resolve disputes, and live without the constant fear of being cheated. And as you rise from the square, stretching your back and brushing clay dust from your hands, you realize something deeply relaxing. Even 5,000 years ago, someone, somewhere, was just trying to get their deposit back. The sun is high now, warming the earth in that dry, buzzing way that makes everything feel just a bit slower, softer, like the air itself has curled up for a nap. But you're still walking. You pass under awnings strung with woven palm mats, past lazy dogs stretched out in the shade, until you reach a curious structure nestled near the edge of a temple quarter, a place that smells faintly of ink, clay, and Something fermented. This is no ordinary building. It's a record house. Yes, but it also serves another purpose. This is where tablets go not just to be stored, but to be checked, audited, copied, and sometimes rewritten. Because today's journey is all about reconciliation, revision, and the art of making sure nobody's cooking the books. You duck under the low entrance and find yourself in a surprisingly cool room. Its thick mud brick walls doing a fine job keeping the heat out. Shelves line the walls, each holding rows of clay tablets sorted with tiny reed labels poking out. A few scribes sit at elevated desks, some cross-legged, others on low stools, muttering to themselves and tapping gently at tablets with styluses. They're not writing new receipts. They're verifying old ones. Mainstream fact. In the Sumerian administrative world, audits were a thing. No, not in the terrifying modern IRS sense, but as regular processes for ensuring that goods recorded were goods received and payments claimed were payments actually delivered. The temple economy, after all, was vast. It managed land, livestock, laborers, and logistics. Someone had to check if that 100 shekels of silver loan from 2 years ago was ever repaid. Someone had to ask, wait, where is that fourth donkey? You watch as a tablet is set beside another. One is marked original, the other copy. The scribe compares them stroke by stroke, line by line. Occasionally, he pauses, lifts a brow, and consults a third tablet a master record from a temple archive. That's right, triple checking, because the stakes were high. Fringe tidbit. Some Sumerian tablets show what scholars believe are corrections a scribe returning months later to carve a new clause or update a transaction with a fresh seal. Others were even overwritten, the old script gently erased or scraped flat, and new entries pressed in, a kind of ancient edit and resend. You come to a desk where a young woman named Ninshuba is hunched over a heavily marked tablet. She sighs, then smiles politely when she notices you. Missing barley again, she says, shaking her head. Always barley. She points to a record from last season. 300 gur of barley were said to be delivered to the temple granary, but no one remembers seeing that much arrive. There's no corresponding receipt from the transport workers. No ration record showing it was handed out. Just a lonely seal and a very optimistic number. And so the audit begins. You glance at the secondary. Copy a small, partial tablet with the same entry, but with an added line, reported by Enlil Manu, confirmed by no other. Oh dear, this is where witnesses become important again. In Sumerian administration, receipts weren't just dry documents. They were the first line of defense in conflict resolution. When disputes arose, scribes would consult these documents, look for witness seals, and sometimes even question the individual's yes. Interviews happened. Imagine it, a 45-minute walk from your field back to the temple office, only to be asked, "Sir, did you or did you not accept 18 baskets of onions in month 4? And you having to answer with a straight face, "Only 12, I swear on the river God." But it mattered, because at the center of the Sumerian receipt system wasn't just grain or goats, it was accountability, not enforced with fines or prison time necessarily, but with reputation. If you were caught misreporting, you might not be jailed, but you'd stop receiving high-value deals. People would hesitate to contract with you. Your seal would trigger side eyes. You could go from trusted delivery man to guy who claimed 6 bricks but brought 3. Historians still argue whether formal punishments existed for minor record falsification. The Code of Ernamu and later Code of Hammurabi include some economic penalties. But for the average Sumerian, it's likely that social trust played a bigger role. So these tablet rooms, they weren't boring back offices, they were battlegrounds of memory, places where truth was carved, uncarved, and reasserted. You pass another station where a man is preparing to duplicate a key document. He spritzes water on the original tablet to soften it, then begins to trace the characters onto fresh clay. His stylus moves smoothly. This isn't his first audit. You notice a quirk. In the margin of the original tablet is a tiny sign, a kind of shorthand. It means agreed upon error. In other words, Both parties once acknowledged that a mistake had been made, and a correction had been added without creating a whole new tablet. It's weirdly graceful, like saying, yes, I goofed, but we're good now. You can't help but admire the forgiveness baked into the process. The goal wasn't perfection, it was clarity. Agreements, even flawed ones, could evolve. Records could be revisited. Trust could be patched with a seal and a handshake. And as you watch the scribes finish their reviews, wrap the updated tablets in cloth and slide them into new shelf positions, you realize something. The Sumerians didn't just invent receipts. They invented revision history. Like ancient version control. Their system allowed for memory to flex without losing its spine. As you step back out into the afternoon light, the smell of baked clay following you like a warm blanket, you hear a familiar sound behind you, the tap 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 of a stylus striking home. It's the quiet beat of accountability. And you realize every time a Sumerian scribe rechecked a barley entry, corrected a name, or added a line for clarity, they were whispering, to the future, we were here, we made a deal, and we meant it. The sun is high now, warming the earth in that dry, buzzing way that makes everything feel just a bit slower, softer, like the air itself has curled up for a nap. But you're still walking. You pass under awnings strung with woven palm mats, past lazy dogs stretched out in the shade, until you reach a curious structure nestled near the edge of a temple quarter, a place that smells faintly of ink, clay, and something fermented. This is no ordinary building, it's a record house. Yes, but it also serves another purpose. This is where tablets go not just to be stored, but to be checked, audited, copied, and sometimes rewritten. Because today's journey is all about reconciliation, revision, and the art of making sure nobody's cooking the books. You duck under the low entrance and find yourself in a surprisingly cool room. Its thick mud brick walls doing a fine job keeping the heat out. Shelves line the walls, each holding rows of clay tablets sorted with tiny reed labels poking out. A few scribes sit at elevated desks, some cross-legged, others on low stools, muttering to themselves and tapping gently at tablets with styluses. They're not writing new receipts. They're verifying old ones. Mainstream fact. In the Sumerian administrative world, audits were a thing. No, not in the terrifying modern IRS sense, but as regular processes for ensuring that goods recorded were goods received and payments claimed were payments actually delivered. The temple economy, after all, was vast. It managed land, livestock, laborers, and logistics. Someone had to check if that 100 shekels of silver loan from 2 years ago was ever repaid. Someone had to ask, wait, where is that fourth donkey? You watch as a tablet is set beside another. One is marked original, the other copy. The scribe compares them stroke by stroke, line by line. Occasionally, he pauses, lifts a brow, and consults a third tablet, a master record from a temple archive. That's right, triple checking, because the stakes were high. Fringe tidbit. Some Sumerian tablets show what scholars believe are corrections a scribe returning months later to carve a new clause or update a transaction with a fresh seal. Others were even overwritten, the old script gently erased or scraped flat, and new entries pressed in, a kind of ancient edit and resend. You come to a desk where a young woman named Ninshuba is hunched over a heavily marked tablet. She sighs, then smiles politely when she notices you. Missing barley again, she says, shaking her head. Always barley. She points to a record from last season. 300 gur of barley were said to be delivered to the temple granary, but no one remembers seeing that much arrive. There's no corresponding receipt from the transport workers. No ration record showing it was handed out. Just a lonely seal and a very optimistic number. And so the audit begins. You glance at the secondary. Copy a small, partial tablet with the same entry, but with an added line. Reported by Enlil Manu. Confirmed by no other. Oh dear, this is where witnesses become important again. In Sumerian administration, receipts weren't just dry documents. They were the first line of defense in conflict resolution. When disputes arose, scribes would consult these documents, look for witness seals, and sometimes even question the individual's yes. Interviews happened, imagine it, a 45-minute walk from your field back to the temple office, only to be asked, "Sir, did you or did you not accept 18 baskets of onions in month 4? And you having to answer with a straight face, "Only 12, I swear on the river god." But it mattered, because at the center of the Sumerian receipt system wasn't just grain or goats, it was accountability, not enforced with fines or prison time necessarily, but with reputation. If you were caught misreporting, you might not be jailed, but you'd stop receiving high-value deals. People would hesitate to contract with you. Your seal would trigger side eyes. You could go from trusted delivery man to guy who claimed 6 bricks but brought 3. Historians still argue whether formal punishments existed for minor record falsification. The Code of Urnomu and later Code of Hammurabi include some economic penalties. But for the average Sumerian, it's likely that social trust played a bigger role. So these tablet rooms, they weren't boring back offices, they were battlegrounds of memory, places where truth was carved, uncarved, and reasserted. You pass another station where a man is preparing to duplicate a key document. He spritzes water on the original tablet to soften it, then begins to trace the characters onto fresh clay. His stylus moves smoothly. This isn't his first audit. You notice a quirk. In the margin of the original tablet is a tiny sign, a kind of shorthand. It means agreed upon error. In other words, both parties once acknowledged that a mistake had been made, and a correction had been added without creating a whole new tablet. It's weirdly graceful, like saying, "Yes, I goofed, but we're good now." You can't help but admire the forgiveness baked into the process. The goal wasn't perfection, it was clarity. Agreements, even flawed ones, could evolve. Records could be revisited. Trust could be patched with a seal and a handshake. And as you watch the scribes finish their reviews, wrap the updated tablets in cloth and slide them into new shelf positions, you realize something. The Sumerians didn't just invent receipts. They invented revision history. Like ancient version control. Their system allowed for memory to flex without losing its spine. As you step back out into the afternoon light, the smell of baked clay following you like a warm blanket, you hear a familiar sound behind you, the tap-tap-tap of a stylus striking home. It's the quiet beat of accountability. And you realize every time a Sumerian scribe rechecked a barley entry, corrected a name, or added a line for clarity, they were whispering to the future, "We were here. We made a deal. And we meant it." By now, the city hums with heat and rhythm. Somewhere a pot boils. Somewhere else a cow moos indignantly. But you're on a different kind of mission today. You're hunting for a tablet that no longer exists. Or rather a type of tablet. One that wasn't meant to last, but still played a crucial role in the Sumerian receipt ecosystem, the temporary record. Because not every receipt in ancient Sumer was archived, sealed, and handed down through generations of scholars in neat baskets. Some were quick scribbles jotted onto soft clay, passed from hand to hand, and forgotten the next day. And today, you're going to track down one of these ghostly little notes. You're guided by a young porter named Lugalkissel. His job, too, ferry items between temple offices, homes, and markets, grain, wool, dates, spices if it fits in a basket. He's carried it. And when things get busy, the scribes don't always have time to make a permanent receipt. That's where intermediary tablets come in. A tablet for just the journey. Mainstream historians describe these as provisional records, simple, minimal, often unbaked. They were soft, flexible, and designed to be erased or discarded once the goods arrived, and the transaction was finalized with a real receipt. You follow Lugalkissel to a busy courtyard near the storage buildings. It's not grand, just some shaded spots, low tables, and a few stressed-looking scribes dashing off quick notes. One of them pauses mid-stroke to blow hair from his face. His tablet, half the size of your palm, to symbols. A seal dotted reads something like, "To kitchen," to baskets, "Luaya." The porter scoops it up like a delivery slip. He doesn't need to read it. He recognizes the format, the seal, the shorthand. off he goes, navigating the twisting alleys of tablet in hand. And here's the thing, that tablet will never see a shelf. Once Luai signs for the delivery or confirms it verbally, the note gets smashed, smoothed, or repurposed. Clay is too valuable to waste. The same lump might be reformed into a new note later that day. Maybe even record something totally different, like a fish count or a date order. It's the closest thing the Sumerians had to a dry erase board. Fringe. Fact. Some unbaked tablets even had finger impressions still visible when archaeologists found them, like the echo of someone's thumbprint mid-delivery. That's how raw and fleeting they were. One moment, a message. The next, Clay again. You reach a shaded wall where a few porters have paused, eating lentil cakes and sipping lukewarm beer. One of them, eyes twinkling, shows you a trick. He smooths a clay tablet with his palm, then writes his name on it, upside down. Proof I existed, he jokes, and tosses it into a basket of scraps. It's funny, yes, but also kind of profound. Because for most Sumerians, receipt tablets weren't legacy documents. They weren't about immortality. They were about surviving the week, making sure no one accused you of stealing bricks, getting the right measure of barley, proving you did, in fact, deliver those reeds to the dockmaster even if he forgot. You step inside a nearby storehouse, really just a long hall with stacked baskets, and some sleepy goats in the back. A scribe sits cross-legged on a mat, surrounded by little balls of clay. His job is to finalize what the porters just proved. You watch as one porter, sweaty, grumbling, hands over his crumbling temporary tablet. The scribe glances at it, asks a few quick questions, then reaches for a fresh slab of clay. The real receipt is born. This one will last. It includes date, contents, destination, and the porter's name. The soft, half-worn note is casually tossed. Aside. It's kind of beautiful, actually. A trust chain in motion. The temporary note carried the truth just far enough for the permanent record to take hold. Historians still argue whether these intermediary tablets were ever official. Some think they were just verbal backups. Others believe they were part of a full documentation process that we've only partially uncovered. What's clear is that Sumerian communication had layers: temporary, semi-official, and final, and everyone in the system knew how to work them. You crouch by a clay pit where kids are helping recycle old tablets. One boy mashes a soft tablet into mush while his sister molds it into something new. He calls it the goat that took our lunch. It doesn't look much like a goat, but it's charming, and it reminds you clay was alive in this world. It moved, it transformed, it bore witness. It wasn't static like paper. It held memory in 3 dimensions. You could press into it. You could feel the past on your fingertips. And that's why even the humblest clay note, used only for an hour or 2, mattered. Because it made a promise, however small. You were seen. Your work counted. The barley wasn't stolen, it was delivered. We have the receipt, even if only for now. As you walk back into the sun, the porter beside you grins and pats a lump of clay tucked into his sash. Just in case. He says, just in case. The Sumerian motto for surviving bureaucracy. You take a different route now, following a narrow canal that snakes along the edge of where reeds whisper and frogs chirp under the noon sun. On either side, small workshops hum with activity potters shaping bowls, metal workers hammering, soft copper, basket weavers gossiping as they work. But you're not here for their crafts. You're here to explore something far more invisible, yet just as essential. Today's journey is about trust networks, how receipts, seals, and reputation created the Sumerian version of credit scores. Because in a world where few could read and even fewer could store personal wealth, how did you know who to trust? Let's say you're buying wool on credit. You're not walking away with a sheep tucked under your arm. You're walking away with a promise, written in clay, backed by someone's seal. And if that seal means nothing, well, good luck redeeming your wool next week. You duck into a small merchant booth tucked behind a date palm grove. Inside, a middle-aged woman named Shabiloni sits cross-legged, counting reeds and muttering under her breath. She's a weaver, but also a moneylender. Sort of. You notice a stack of narrow clay tablets beside her slim as fingers, smooth and sealed. You pick one up gently. It's not a contract. It's not a receipt. It's a debt token. Mainstream fact. In summer, clay tokens were often used to represent future transactions. A type of IOU. A man might receive oil today and promise to repay in silver at harvest. The promise would be sealed, witnessed, and handed over to the lender. And until he paid, that tablet was a visible liability. And here's the kicker: these tokens were transferable. That's right. You could sell someone's debt to someone else. Lewin Lil owes me for shekels. Great. I'll sell that IOU to my cousin for 3 shekels now, and he can chase down the rest later. Suddenly, debt becomes currency. This isn't just bookkeeping. This is the birth of trust as a tradable asset. You lean in as Shabaloni explains her system. Lucula pays late, she says, tapping a cracked token, but always pays. His brother, forget it. Never again. It's not written anywhere. There's no formal blacklist, but the memory of these transactions lives on in scribes' notes, in whispers, in careful little ticks carved into tablet margins. Fringe fact: some tablets even included reputation modifiers. Words like reliable, frequent, or your favorite, prone to forgetting, like an ancient Yelp review carved into clay. It was informal, but it stuck. And this brings us to the power of the seal. You step outside and walk toward the market, where people are buying dried fish, crushed dates, and bundles of onion stalks. At one booth, a man accepts a tiny clay chit with a single line of text and a cylinder seal impression. He nods, hands over the goods, and waves the buyer on. You watch the cylinder seal gleam faintly in the light. It shows a lion chasing a bird. Personal, dramatic, unmistakable. This is the buyer's mark of honor. In a world of receipts, the seal wasn't just identification, it was reputation incarnate. If your seal got known for defaults, lateness, or trickery, people would stop accepting it. The clay might say paid, but the shopkeeper would shake their head and say, not from him. And yet, seals could also restore trust. You hear of a woman who defaulted after her husband died. She couldn't pay her grain debt for 3 months. But when she re-entered the marketplace, she brought witnesses, signed a new agreement, and offered a double-sealed receipt, hers and her cousin's. A guarantee. It worked. Trust returned. Credit reopened. Historians still argue whether these informal trust systems evolved into something like credit. Ratings not official, but whispered and known. What's certain is that reputation moved faster than the rivers. And here's where it gets clever. Some wealthy traders created third-party seals, basically endorsements. Let's say you're unknown in the city. You want to buy bronze on credit. The seller hesitates. So you show a receipt bearing your seal and the seal of Enkebani, a well-known merchant. Oh, he vouches for you? Deal done. It's Sumerian co-signing, ancient networking, clay-based credibility. And it wasn't just about money. A man's seal was used on witness statements, marriage contracts, even temple service logs. It followed him through life like a resume. And when he died, his seal might be buried with him unless, of course, it passed to his son. In that case, the seal stayed in circulation, along with its reputation. You sit now on a stone ledge at the edge of the market, watching children play a game with pebbles and shards of old tablets. One girl yells out, "You forgot to sign it," and demands a friend stamp the dirt with a pretend seal. Even the kids know, if it isn't sealed, it isn't real. You smile, because here's the heart of it. Sumerian receipts didn't just track grain and goats. They built a system of social credit where your promises mattered, where your seal opened doors or slammed them shut, and where clay wasn't just for numbers, but for character. In a world without banks, barcodes, or blockchain, trust was still currency. And it all came down to a pinch of clay, a flick of the wrist, and a quiet confidence of leaving your mark. You leave the bustling market behind, the scent of garlic and drying fish trailing you like a ghost. The alleyways are narrow again as you head south, toward a quieter neighborhood near the edge of the city walls. Here, the buildings lean in, close, and you pass rows of humble homes, small workshops, and one very enthusiastic dog. You're not looking for wealth or spectacle today. You're here to find the home office of an independent scribe, the kind who didn't work for a temple or palace, but offered his services to everyday citizens, one tablet at a time. You duck beneath a reed awning into a shady courtyard. A few chickens scatter as you pass. Then, under the slatted shade of a tamarisk tree, you find him, a scribe named Ibn Sin, sitting cross-legged on a mat, his stylus twirling between fingers like a conductor's baton dot. This is your entry into the world of freelance receipts, because not all scribes were high-ranking temple accountants. Some were hired on the spot to record debts, rentals, marriage arrangements, or borrowed donkeys, and many of their clients were semi-literate or illiterate. So the whole system depended on oral agreements, careful listening, and unshakable trust. Mainstream. Fact, scribes were often paid in kind grain, textiles, even beer for their services, and a single tablet might take hours to compose, especially when the terms were complex. It was a gig economy carved in clay. You sit beside Ibn Sin as a pair of men approach him. One is carrying a sack, the other a nervous expression. They're here to draft a loan agreement, 5 shekels of silver, to be repaid in barley at the harvest. Not a palace loan, not a temple deal, just to neighbors agreeing on a risk. Ibn Sin listens carefully. He clarifies dates, asks questions about the harvest. Then he reaches for clay, smooths it flat with practiced hands, and begins to write. You watch the characters emerge. It's not just text, it's precision art. The stylus dances, Lou Malik lends silver to Uriah. Repayment due by the month, of goats. Witnessed by LUGAL-AZ ag. Double quotes. Then comes the sealing. Both men press their cylinder seals into the damp clay. The witness does too. And just like that, this casual backyard handshake becomes binding. You glance around the courtyard. On one wall, a reed shelf holds copies of previous tablets, not official archives, just personal spares in case someone forgets. Ibn Sin says with a grin, fringe fact, some freelance scribes created their own shorthand systems, abbreviated glyphs for common names or terms to speed things up. These personal scribal quirks have puzzled historians for decades. One archaeologist once found a tablet ending in a smiley face-shaped mark, though scholars still debate if it was decorative or just a chipped stylus. The point is, no two scribes wrote exactly the same way. Their tablets carried accents like dialects of clay. You spend the afternoon watching clients come and go. A woman wants to record a dowry gift, 5 baskets of wool, 1 cow, and a set of copper bracelets. A boy records the return of a borrowed axe. A group of 3 young men splits the cost of a new fishing net and agrees to share the catch. Each deal ends with a soft press of the seal, and behind it all the humble scribe. Not a judge, not a priest, just a man with clay, a stylus, and a front row seat to everyone's business. Historians still argue whether freelance scribes held legal authority equal to temple scribes. Some suggest their tablets were viewed as lesser in disputes, but archaeological evidence shows that many freelance contracts ended up in long-term archives, their seals treated with the same weight as any palace document. And here's a delightful twist: some scribes offered extra services. One tablet you find includes a short inscription at the end, composed by Ibn Sin, scribe and singer. Apparently, he wrote receipts and played the lute at weddings. His seal even features a lion next to his name. It's not hard to imagine. A moonlit courtyard. A marriage contract signed with laughter and music, sealed in clay and melody. You ask Ibn Sin about disputes. Oh yes, he says, they come back sometimes, say, that's not what we agreed. I just point to the seal. Then I offer to rewrite for a fee, of course. He laughs, not unkindly. People forget what they said, but clay remembers. And that, right there, is the essence of freelance receipt culture. It wasn't just about accuracy, it was about being heard. The scribe wasn't just a writer. He was a witness, a memory bank, a living contract, and sometimes a peacemaker. Daughters. The sun begins to dip. Ibn Sin gathers his tools. He wraps the unused clay in damp cloth. He stacks his finished tablets on a reed tray. Then, before heading inside, he brushes the dust from his robe and straightens his seal cord. A professional through and through. You sit alone for a moment, the tamarisk leaves whispering overhead. Behind you, a wall of promises written in clay. Each one a story, a trust, a yes, we agreed. Not temple gold, not royal decrees, just ordinary people sealing ordinary lives. The evening breeze carries with it the scent of baked dates and ash, and somewhere far off, a reed flute begins to play. It's the hour when earth starts to slow, when the hustle gives way to murmurs and shadows stretch long across the alleys. But tonight, your path takes a curious detour away from city streets through a narrow archway, and into a place less often seen. You're heading into the world of lost receipts, because while thousands of Sumerian tablets have survived the millennia, buried and preserved in baked form, many more simply disappeared, and some were meant to. You enter a low-walled courtyard flanked by storage sheds and clay bins. A pair of boys are rolling tablets down a shallow incline, smashing them for fun. One of them stops and grins at you. "Old debt," he says, holding up a crumbling piece. "Not mine. This, it turns out, is a clay recycling yard, not a formal archive, not a temple, just a practical, dust-blown space where old or broken tablets are ground down, rehydrated, and reshaped into new ones. And tonight, you're here to explore the Sumerian habit of erasing the past. On purpose, you walk the yard slowly, sidestepping shattered fragments. Some bear still visible signs, a stylus stroke here, the curve of a seal there, ghosts of agreements long voided, a trade contract that was never fulfilled, a ration record for someone who's moved on, a cancelled debt. Mainstream fact: many Sumerian receipts were not baked in kilns, but left to air dry. This made them easy to store but also easy to destroy. If a loan was repaid or a trade completed without conflict, the receipt could simply be returned to the scribe, smoothed over and reused, or, in some cases, broken on the spot to mark the deal as settled. You watch an old man gently crumble a dry tablet into a bowl, adding water slowly. He speaks without looking up. "No need to keep what's done," he says, "unless you want trouble. It's practical, elegant, even. But there's a deeper current here, a culture of impermanence. While the grand tablets the temple records, the legal contracts were meant to endure. Everyday receipts were often temporary tools designed to live only as long as the memory of the agreement needed them to. Fringe fact: some contracts actually included an expiration clause. This record shall be returned and destroyed upon repayment. In other words, the destruction of the receipt was part of the ritual, like erasing a chalkboard. The deal's done, the slate wiped clean. You squat beside a pile of fragments and trace the faint indent of a stylus. The signs are worn, barely legible. Maybe it was a cattle count. Maybe it was the name of someone long forgotten. Either way, its meaning is gone, and yet that tells a story. Historians still debate how much was lost in these daily purges. Were there whole categories of records emotional iOS, apologies, secret debts that we'll never know about, because they were never meant to last? One theory even suggests that lovers may have used unbaked clay to send private messages soft, unsealed, left to dry and crumble once read. A romantic gesture as fragile as a whispered promise. You find one tablet fragment with a faint inscription, "I return the ox," and a rope and a trouble. There's no seal, no date, just those words, scrawled on a crooked surface. A farewell, a confession you'll never know. But that's the beauty of it, because for every clay tablet that survives in a museum today, there were hundreds more that lived brief, useful lives then dissolved back into mud and memory. You walk farther into the yard and discover something unexpected. A small pile of half-erased tablets, the writing just beginning to be scraped. Off. You ask the man beside them what happened. He shrugs, disputes, he says, they weren't sure. And suddenly, this place feels not just like a junkyard but a waiting room of history. A place where stories paused, where agreements were contested, then abandoned, where people decided not to keep something carved in clay, That's worth thinking about. In our own world, permanence is prized. We fear forgetting. We archive everything. But here in summer, they seem to understand something different sometimes. The most powerful thing you can do with a record is let it go. You watch as the man picks up one of the half-erased tablets and tosses it into the slurry bowl. He presses it flat, hands it to a nearby apprentice, and with a few brisk strokes, it becomes something new, a fresh slate. You step away, your fingers dusty, your thoughts quiet. In the distance, the last rays of sun hit the city walls, painting them a gold so soft it looks almost like candlelight. A dog barks, someone laughs, and beneath it all, the earth absorbs the memory of 10,000 forgotten transactions, because even the receipts that vanished left an imprint not just in clay, but in how the Sumerians saw the world. Make the deal, seal the record, and when the time comes, break the tablet, set it free. The stars begin to peek through the hazy veil above her as you follow the scent of baked flatbread and river mud. Lamps flicker in doorways, their flames swaying like sleepy dancers. The city is winding down, but your evening isn't quite over. Tonight, you're heading to a place that blurs the line between sacred and bureaucratic. The tablet room of the temple library. You've seen scribes in dusty courtyards. You've seen freelance tablets and quick delivery notes. But now, you're entering the sanctum of official archiving, a quiet world of cool stone, warm oil lamps, and shelves that don't hold scrolls, but clay bricks of memory. A temple. Priest named Enhedu leads you past a courtyard garden, where incense drifts upward from a clay burner. Her footsteps are slow and deliberate. She says little, but when she pushes open the heavy wooden door, a wave of stillness hits you. The room is dim and dry, lined with recessed shelves carved into thick mud brick walls. On each shelf, dozens, sometimes hundreds of tablets. Some are tiny palm-sized and sealed. Others are massive, thick as bricks and covered in tight, careful script. And every one of them tells a story of something that mattered. This is the archive, the true memory of the city. Mainstream fact. Major temples like the one in Earth functioned as both spiritual centers and bureaucratic hubs. They tracked grain storage, property ownership, workforce rations, court cases, livestock breeding, and yes, receipts. But here, unlike the freelancer's courtyard or the porter's slip of clay, every record was baked, catalogued and preserved. You run your hand along one shelf and find a small tablet marked with 5 seals. Enhedu nods. Joint agreement, she whispers, a loan shared by several merchants, never repaid. The date on it? Over 100 years before your walk through this city began, and yet the clay feels alive under your fingers, as if someone just handed it off this morning. She shows you the archive system, tablets organized by content and year, separated into categories like trade, temple labor, marriages, complaints and debt settlements. Many are wrapped in simple reed cases, labeled with string and a dangling tag made of fired clay. It's astonishingly complex. A card catalogue in the Bronze Age. Fringe fact, in some Sumerian cities, the same tablet might be copied 3 or 4 times, with each copy stored in a different archive. One with the lender, one with the borrower. One at the temple, and one buried in a foundation deposit just in case. You find one such tablet, a dull grey rectangle with faded marks and a chisel. Notch across the top. Temple copy, Enhedu says. Buried during the renovation, they left us a second one on the shelf. And now you notice many of the tablets here have edges marked with notches, or dots. A primitive color coding system. This notch means a cancelled debt, she explains. To notches, an unresolved case, red mark, that's tax. It's all here. Tax evasion, crop insurance, ceremonial wine orders. You sit on a low bench beside a basket labeled filed but forgotten, and your eyes drift to a curious object, a clay envelope. Yes, that's right, an envelope, a hardened clay shell encasing, a tablet, sealed and marked. In summer, important receipts were sometimes sealed inside these envelopes. If someone tried to tamper with the tablet, the envelope would crack. To read the tablet, you had to break it open. Think of it as tamper evident. Packaging. In 2000 BCE, historians still argue whether the outer envelope was considered official version or just protection, but in either case, it shows how seriously they took documentation. Sometimes a seal wasn't enough, you needed layers of proof. You ask Enhedu how often these tablets are referenced. All the time, she says. Someone dies and their property has to be reallocated, we come here. Someone claims they made a payment 20 years ago, we come here. She pulls a tablet from a high shelf. This one settled a land dispute between cousins. The clay is cracked. The seal impressions are faint. But there it is, the exact dimensions of the field, the agreed upon terms, and a final phrase in delicate script, so written, so witnessed. And it occurs to you that this room is more than a filing cabinet, it's a temple of memory, a place where facts are preserved, not to haunt people but to protect them. Every tablet is a promise, every shelf, a ledger of peace. You find a quiet corner and sit, watching as Enhedu adjusts a bundle of documents. There's no fanfare here, no gleaming walls or treasure-laden altars, but somehow it feels more sacred than any shrine, because in summer to record was to believe, and to archive was to honor the truth, however muddy, however mundane. Outside, the night air cools. A donkey brays. Somewhere, someone is making a promise or breaking one, and tomorrow a scribe will write it down. Maybe it will live on a shelf like this. Maybe it will be erased. But for now, in this room of whispers and dust, the past is safe, and that's no small thing. By now, the city of has truly quieted. The last market crier has gone silent, and only the occasional giggle or clink of pottery echoes across the rooftops. But your night isn't quite over, not when there's still one more curious corner of Sumerian life to explore. Tonight, you're heading to the edge of town, where the city fades into dusty marshes and the scent of damp earth is strongest. You pass under a reed archway into a small compound, half storage space, half open air. Meeting room. The moonlight hits stacks of crates and baskets. But your eyes are drawn to something else. A group of people gathered around a fire pit, their faces lit in orange glow, hands busy with clay. This is the world of the informal tablet receipts, and records made not by temple scribes or royal accountants, but by ordinary people for ordinary reasons, because not everything needed official seals. Sometimes your neighbor owed you a chicken, or you lent someone a copper pot and wanted it back before the festival, and sometimes you just wanted proof that someone said what they said. So you made a tablet. And maybe you didn't know all the proper signs. Maybe your handwriting was crooked. Maybe you misspelled barley. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the act of writing, of claiming a truth in clay. Mainstream fact. Archaeologists have found countless casual or amateur tablets clumsily written, sealed only with a thumbprint. Often lacking dates or standard phrasing, these weren't legal masterpieces. They were personal safeguards. Tonight, you watch as a teenage boy named Nanny scratches out a line of text on a lump of soft clay. His friend giggles over his shoulder. "What's it say?" you ask. He grins. "It says Era owes me a sheep, but I drew it to." You lean closer. Sure enough, next to the wobbly cuneiform, there's a picture of a very round sheep with large eyes. Not exactly canon to the scribal tradition, but charming and clear. That's the heart of these informal receipts. Clarity over elegance. A crooked seal, a thumbprint, a single name, even drawings. Whatever worked. Fringe tidbit. Some of these personal tablets were found hidden in household walls, not buried formally, but tucked away like secret reminders. Scholars speculate they were used in private disputes, perhaps between spouses, neighbors, or family members. You wander over to an older man sitting with a small group. He's helping a woman shape a clay token into a kind of marker. She's quiet, focused. He gently encourages her to press her ring into the corner and improvised seal. What's she recording? You whisper. He shrugs. A debt from her cousin, I think. Or a promise. It's not about litigation. It's about remembering. These tablets don't go to the temple. They're not filed in an archive. They sit in kitchens, hang from door hooks, or get passed from, hand to hand like receipts at a village market. And sometimes they're used in more creative ways. You spot a woman holding up a tablet and chanting in a sing-song voice. Around her, children laugh. Turns out she's using a clay tablet as a teaching tool, a kind of early flashcard. 1 sheep, 2 sheep, she says, pointing to the symbols. Then she flips it over to reveal a messy drawing of a shepherd sleeping. The kids love it, and you can't help but smile, because here, the humble receipt has become something more, a medium of connection. Historians still debate how widespread literacy was in summer. Some say it was limited to scribes and elites. Others argue that functional literacy, basic reading and writing, was surprisingly common among merchants, craftsmen, even farmers. Whatever the case, it's clear that writing had filtered into daily life, and even when people couldn't write well, they still understood the power of marks in clay. You watch as a young girl scratches her name into a soft lump and presses a flower petal into the edge. I want them to know it's mine, she says. Simple, profound, timeless, and perhaps most touching of all, a middle-aged man carefully molding a round tablet, not for a debt or trade, but for his child. He's writing the baby's name, the date of birth, and a single word, blessed. Not a receipt, not a contract, just a father marking a moment. You ask him what he'll do with it. Maybe I'll bury it, he says. Maybe I'll keep it under the mat. A Sumerian baby book in clay. By the firelight. You realize how deeply this culture understood the weight of writing, not just for governance, but for the human need to hold memory in your hands. These informal tablets won't show up in textbooks. They might never be read by future scholars, but they mattered to the people who made them. They held small truths, quiet victories, chicken debts, newborn names. And that's enough. You rise, stretch, and thank the group as they return to their work and stories. Behind you, someone sings a lullaby to a child nestled in a woven sling. A goat bleats in the distance. Clay cools in the night air. And somewhere, a crooked tablet waits in a windowsill to be remembered or forgotten. But for now, it whispers softly, I was here. I mattered. I made a mark. The city is deep in sleep now. Shadows spill across the alleys like ink, and the occasional flicker of lamplight behind a reed curtain is all that signals life. You walk slowly, your sandals soft against the warm brick path, your thoughts drifting like the smoke rising from rooftop hearths. You're not heading to a temple or a marketplace tonight. You're heading to the riverbank where records were never made, yet where some of the most fascinating Sumerian economic activity unfolded. The barter zone. Yes, that's right. Even in a society that practically invented receipts, not everything needed one. Some exchanges were so casual, so immediate, that no clay ever touched the transaction, and yet they formed the undercurrent of daily survival. You reach the riverside and find it busy, even under moonlight. Fishermen pull in their late catches. A woman squats beside a small fire, frying flatbread on a shard of copper. A teenage boy balances to jars of beer on a reed mat, offering one to an ox driver in exchange for dried figs. No scribes here, no styluses, just words and hands and goods. Mainstream fact, despite the existence of a detailed accounting system in temples and official life, barter remained a critical part of the Sumerian economy, especially in peripheral or rural areas where scribes weren't always available and transactions were small or frequent. You watch as two older men squat beside a heap of river fish, speaking low and fast. One produces a coil of rope and lays it down. The other examines it, sniffs it, then points. To 3 fish, a deal is struck with a nod. No clay, no receipt, just trust and a river's worth of habit. But barter wasn't lawless. Quite the opposite, it operated on an understood code that everyone seemed to follow. Certain goods had rough equivalencies. Everyone knew that 1 shekel of silver could trade for 180 liters of barley or for wool tunics. You didn't need a tablet to tell you that. Still, fringe fact, some barter deals did end up being memorialized later. If someone traded goats for land or beer for a long-term service, they'd often return to a scribe later that day to formalize the terms. The original trade might have been verbal, but the receipt was retroactive. You find a woman named Ninmelila hauling baskets of leeks down to a boatman, who hands her a jug of sesame oil in return. They argue playfully over whether it's full. She sloshes it once, raises an eyebrow, and the boatman laughs. He pours more in. Trade complete. This is the heart of Sumerian informal commerce, real-time negotiation. No middlemen, no styluses, just the clink of jars and the flick of fingers. Historians still argue whether barter was seen as lesser than written transactions. Some scholars suggest that writing elevated a trade to official status, while others believe written records were simply more practical for long-term deals or disputes. But all agree barter coexisted with the receipt system, not beneath it, and in some cases it was preferred. You spot a traveling shepherd seated near a dock, brushing dust from his feet. He's just traded a kid goat for 3 linen wraps. You ask if he'd ever get a receipt for something like that. He grins. Why? We both got what we wanted. Then he adds, more seriously, but if he shortchanges me next time, I'll make him write it down. Barter wasn't about recklessness. It was about scale, speed, and social pressure. In small communities, your reputation was your receipt. Cheat someone, and you'd never trade in that circle again. You pause near a flickering torch where 2 young women are haggling over a basket of dried fish and a bundle of dates. One offers an extra fig as a sweetener. The other counters with a few onion bulbs. No shouting, no drama, just the quiet music of exchange. And this, too, is history. Not all history is carved in stone or etched in clay. Sometimes it lives in gestures, customs, and bargains made under starlight. You crouch beside the river and watch as another group arrives, fisherfolk from downstream, bringing fresh catches wrapped in wet reeds. Traders gather. Someone sings. A jug of beer is passed. Deals are struck. No stylus is in sight. But you know that behind every casual exchange lies the echo of a system, one that valued memory, trust, and rhythm. Some of tonight's trades will be forgotten by morning. Some will be remembered in stories. And maybe, just maybe, a few will be formalized in a receipt by midday tomorrow. But for now, the barter zone hums, and you realize something quietly profound. The Sumerians didn't invent receipts because they distrusted each other. They invented receipts to scale their trust beyond neighbors, beyond bartering into cities, temples, and time. But here on the riverbank, under stars older than any clay, trust is still enough. You follow the winding road away from the temple, past reed fences and sleepy goats, toward the industrial heartbeat of the city. A pale dawn begins to bloom, and the warm scent of bread baking in communal ovens rides on the wind. But your destination smells less inviting, like burnt limestone and damp clay, because this morning you're heading into the domain of tablet production, where receipts weren't just written, they were manufactured. You arrive at a long, open structure near the city's edge. Its ceiling is made of stretched cloth, casting cool shadows on the bustling workers below. This is a scribal supply yard, and today you'll see the entire process that transformed raw river mud into the record-keeping engine of civilization. It starts, unsurprisingly, with mud. Mainstream fact: the clay used for tablets came mostly from the banks of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, fine silt deposited over centuries, rich and workable when wet. But it wasn't just scooped and scribbled on, it had to be processed. Like any other industrial material, you watch as 2 boys knead a large pile of pale grey clay with their feet. Like bakers treading dough, their toes squish and churn, breaking apart dry clumps. Then they sift the mixture through woven reed mats, removing pebbles, shells, and the occasional crab. Once filtered, the clay is scooped into baskets and brought to the shaping area, where workers roll it into tablet blanks, uniform, oblong shapes, ready to be written on. Some are flat, some rounded, and a few are square, with little finger holes for hanging by cords. These blanks are custom-sized, depending on the type of document needed. Long-term contracts, bigger tablets, quick receipts or delivery slips small. Pocket-sized pieces, fringe fact. Some scribes carried their own clay in wax pouches like a portable notebook, so they could whip up a tablet on the spot when a transaction occurred. Truly, the original mobile device. You move to a bench where a woman is smoothing a tablet's surface with a thin reed edge. Her hands are calloused but graceful. She dampens the clay slightly, then sets it under a fine mesh net to dry for just a few minutes, enough to firm it up before writing begins. Because here's a surprising detail. Fresh clay is too soft to write on cleanly. It needs to be just firm enough to hold the stylus marks without collapsing. You try pressing a stylus into one that's too wet. The lines blur immediately, but on a partially dried tablet, the signs appear crisp and deep. Satisfied, the woman selects her stylus's simple wedge-shaped reed and begins writing. It's mesmerizing. The tool flicks, twists, and presses like a calligrapher's brush. You quickly realize that this is performance as much as documentation. Every sign has to be perfectly proportioned. Miswrite a number or a name, and the entire deal might fall apart later. You glance around and see racks filled with still drying tablets, waiting for delivery or baking. Some are left unbaked, especially for temporary records. Others are fired in low kilns like ceramic bread loaves of bureaucracy. Historians still debate how standardized tablet sizes were across the region. Some scholars argue that major cities used centralized formatting, while others point to highly localized styles even in layout, stylus width, and spacing preferences. You peek at the tablets side by side, both listing grain deliveries, but one is densely packed, while the other has generous margins and even a decorative swirl near the seal. That one's from Lagash, someone mutters. They always had flair, and just when you think you've seen it all, a child toddles by holding what looks like a small toy but turns out to be a practice tablet. It's scored with lines like training paper. Some signs are perfect, others are hilariously off-kilter, but it's all part of the scribal education system. You learn that scribal apprentices began learning to write around age 8, often using clay offcuts and rejected tablets. They copied sign after sign, often under the stern eye of a teacher called the Amir. Mistakes were erased with damp fingers or smoothed over entirely, eventually. Advanced students graduated to copying receipt templates, standard contracts, payment clauses, even full inventories. These weren't legal, of course, just clay drills for a future scribe, and occasionally they'd go off script. You find one student tablet tucked in the shadows. It starts with a basic debt clause, one sheep owed by Erlugal, but then descends into doodles of donkeys, stars, and what appears to be a very bored-looking sun god, scribes, ancient professionals, but also kids with too much homework. Near the kiln, a team loads tablets onto racks and slides them into the flames. The temperature isn't as high as modern ceramics, just enough to harden the clay, without shattering it. Some tablets are singed dark around the edges, giving them a smoky hue. Fringe fact, many of the tablets that survived for thousands of years did so because their storage rooms caught fire, accidentally firing the tablets and preserving them for eternity. A clerical error turned archaeological miracle. You sit near the kiln, watching the fire flicker. Around you, the buzz of industry continues, shaping, writing, drying, sealing, baking. A ballet of mud and memory. And you realize this isn't just paperwork. This is a culture-wide collaboration from riverbank to record. Everyone had a role. Clay gatherers, stylus carvers, kiln workers, archivists, and of course, the scribes themselves, artists of the administrative age. Because receipts weren't just marks in clay. They were built one smooth slab at a time. The sun is rising fully now, spilling warm light across the city's rooftops and making the baked mud bricks glow gold. Merchants begin their chants, goats bleat awake, and somewhere a mother calls a child to help with water-fetching duties. But you're headed somewhere quieter, again away from the noise and back into the stories hidden behind walls. Today's visit is about something most people overlook when they think of receipts, inheritance. Bacau. Say, what happens to all those debts, land rights, dowries, or contracts when someone dies? Well, in summer, Those weren't just passed on with a nod and a handshake. No, they came with receipts, too. You're visiting the modest home of a scribal executor, someone who manages estates, untangles messy ledgers, and ensures that what was promised in life makes its way, more or less, to the next generation. Her name is Amiyuchu. She's already at work when you arrive, seated cross-legged beneath a pergola hung with drying onions. Before her is a tray of tablets, each marked with a bright string or dab of red pigment. These, she says, are death tablets. You blink. Death tablets? She explains, when someone passed away, especially if they were wealthy, childless, or connected to a temple, their possessions were catalogued in clay. Every jug, every parcel of land, every slave, every sheep, every outstanding debt, all of it was accounted for in detailed posthumous receipts. Mainstream fact, the Sumerians practiced early forms of estate management, including legal documentation of inheritance, often witnessed by elders or priests and recorded on tablets that would be sealed and stored, sometimes with the body or in family shrines. Amiyutu holds one out to you. It's heavy, round-edged, the writing dense and precise. Upon the death of Luenlil, to fields east of the canal are granted to his daughter Nanaikua, with 1/3 yield owed to the temple. There it is, a will, for 1,000 years before lawyers and probate court. Next to it, another tablet lists only items: 3 jars of beer, 2 tunics, 1 bronze mirror, to be burned in the burial pyre. Why receipts for things that are going to burn, you ask? Amiyuchu shrugs. So the gods know they were given, so the living don't lie. It's not about future use, it's about honoring intent. A receipt. For the underworld. You notice a cracked tablet labeled with thumbprint seals rather than names. She explains that some people were illiterate or too old to write, so instead, they pressed a fingerprint or personal mark into the clay as signature. These marks are legally binding, and some tablets bear 4 or 5 thumbprints along the edge. Fringe fact? Some Sumerians even attached tiny effigies or charms to their estate receipts, baked clay miniatures of the items involved, like a dollhouse-sized sheep or a stylized grain jar, a visual pledge for gods or heirs who couldn't read. You sift through another tray and find a series of disputes. 2 brothers arguing over a vineyard, a nephew claiming a debt was forgiven before death, a widow petitioning to keep the weaving workshop her husband left to his sister. Historians still argue whether women in summer had full inheritance rights, or if their claims were only valid under special conditions, but the receipts show a pattern. Women named as heirs, guardians, and recipients of temple stipends, especially in urban households. One tablet reads, "Let it be known that Ninaya has rightful claim to the courtyard garden of Urnomu, and no man shall contest her water rights." You smile. It's not just dusty law, it's the voice of someone refusing to be erased. Amiyuchu gestures for you to follow. She brings you into a low room where a family archive is stored, rows of tablets, wrapped in linen, each bundle marked with a seal tag. These have passed through 5 generations, she says. We only open them when we must. This is the Sumerian version of a family filing cabinet, and it's surprisingly intimate. One bundle includes baby naming receipts, dowries, marriage, contracts, death records, even a tablet marked property of the dog Solugal. You raise an eyebrow. Amiyuchu nods. He was valuable. They registered him like livestock. That's right. Even pets could have a place in the accounting of memory. As she repacks the tablets, you notice something curious. A tiny baked tag with no text, just an imprint of a hand and a reed. She sees you staring and says, "That was her mark, the grandmother. She couldn't write, but she always signed that way." There's tenderness here. In the dryness of law, the clay's cold surface, the hard stylus marks, there are echoes of emotion, memory, love, fear, and pride. Because receipts didn't just track barley and sheep, they tracked lives. You stand, brushing dust from your knees, and thank Amiyuchu. She smiles and presses a blank clay tag into your palm. Make your own mark someday, she says. That's how we're remembered. And as you step outside into the warming morning, you carry it with you, this small, silent lump of potential, a reminder that in ancient summer, To leave behind a life well documented wasn't just a sign of wealth or power. It was a way to say, I lived, I gave, I mattered. As the sun climbs higher, casting bold shadows across mud brick courtyards and reed awnings, you make your way toward the liveliest spot in this city, the courthouse. Not the grand stone buildings of modern justice, but an open square shaded by woven mats where scribes sit cross-legged beside city elders, and aggrieved neighbors arrive with tablets clutched like shields. This is where receipts go to fight. You settle onto a low bench in the shade, trying not to attract too much attention. A man in a dusty tunic stomps forward, waving a cracked clay tablet and shouting, "The ox was mine when we agreed." His rival, older and slower, holds up his tablet in reply to receipts. One ox, one ancient courtroom drama. Mainstream fact: Sumerian city-states had well-established legal traditions by 2100 BCE, including formalized trial procedures, property arbitration, and debt enforcement, all of which relied heavily on written records. A receipt could be the difference between justice and ruin. A young scribe collects both tablets and passes them to the judging elders, who sit in a semicircle beneath a canopy. These aren't robed magistrates, they're respected community members, priests, retired merchants, people who know how to read tablets, and people. The judges confer quietly, occasionally squinting at the seals, reading dates, and murmuring phrases like "this seal is older" or "there's no witness." Mark. After a few tense minutes, they nod, and the ox is awarded to the older man. No shouting, no appeals, just Claire's verdict. You're amazed at how quickly these cases move. Another woman steps forward with a complaint about stolen weaving tools. Her neighbor denies the theft until she presents a tablet signed with both their thumbprints, clearly stating that he borrowed the tools and promised return by the last full moon. Case closed. Fringe fact: some legal tablets had built-in clauses like "if challenged, this matter should be brought before the elders," or "may the gods judge if this is false." A mix of social accountability and divine insurance. In one corner, a man has brought for tablets to prove the age of a date palm grove he claims was passed down from his grandfather. The opposing party brought only one and signed. The elders examined the tablets, even checking for signs of tampering. You notice one with faint water damage. The scribe squints, then carefully chips at the edge to reveal a hidden tablet within a trick used to ensure authenticity. Clay envelopes strike again. Historians still argue how frequently forgery occurred in summer. Some scholars claim it was rare due to the sheer effort and training required to imitate seals and stylus patterns. Others suggest forgery was common enough to merit frequent witness signatures and even redundant tablet copies. The sheer presence of multiple copies in legal disputes suggests a culture deeply aware of the fallibility of memory and the risks of dishonesty. Near midday, a particularly strange case rolls in literally. A cart arrives carrying what appears to be a large storage jar, with the receipt carved directly onto the jar itself. Permanent storage, the scribe says with a grin, for long-term wine rental. You laugh. It's absurd and brilliant. Even wine vessels had fine print. The judges check the inscription, verify the seal carved into the clay neck of the jar, and declare the wine dispute resolved. You half expect them to pop the lid and celebrate. In one touching moment, a teenage girl approaches with a small tablet, hands shaking. Her father died last week, and her uncles are contesting the garden he gave her. She has no advocate, no witnesses, just a single tablet pressed with his seal and the words, "To my daughter, that she may grow what I cannot." The judges pause. One reaches over, gently taps the tablet with his stylus and says, "That will do." Verdict rendered. You realize then that receipts didn't just defend property, they defended people, especially those without loud voices or big armies. In a world without digital records or paper trails, a small piece of clay could hold an entire legacy. You wander over to a shaded stack of tablets tagged "settled." Some are split cleanly down the center, each party took a half. Others are bound with twine, sealed in pairs to prevent tampering. And then there's the been marked, disputed, unresolved claims, tablets too old to verify, broken seals, missing witnesses. You run a finger over the surface of one and imagine the tension it once held. Because not all receipts end with a neat solution. Sometimes the truth stays baked in. Silence. But what's undeniable is this: Sumerian courts trusted receipts over memory, over emotion, over loud voices. And why shouldn't they? In a world where the wrong ox, the wrong tunic, or the wrong handful of barley could change a life, a well-made receipt was as close to justice as you could hope for. You rise from the bench, brush off your tunic, and head back into the light. Behind you, another case begins. Another tablet is handed over. Another voice is heard, and the clay listens, just as it always has. The moon has climbed high now, bathing the rooftops and courtyards of ancient Ur in soft silver. The streets have quieted. Lamps burn low. Somewhere nearby, a lullaby floats through the air. Its words long forgotten, but its tune as old as time. You make your final stop tonight at a temple gate, not for worship, but to witness a tradition older than writing itself, the offering of thanks. Here, the temple scribe has just finished documenting the day's final gift. He smooths the surface of a small clay tablet, still warm from the shaping slab, and with a few gentle presses of his stylus, records, 1 jug of sweet beer, given by Shoranana, for good fortune in childbirth. Then, instead of storing the tablet in the archive or sealing it in a jar, he places it on a small ledge. Exposed to the open air, this isn't a record to last forever. It's an offering, a receipt for the gods. Mainstream fact, in many Mesopotamian temples, especially those dedicated to healing or fertility deities, people would leave votive offerings accompanied by small tablets, written records of their intentions, thanks, or requests. Some of these were ritual receipts, not meant for human filing systems, but for divine attention. You stand in the shadows, watching as others arrive, each one quiet, reverent. A weaver places a length of dyed wool. A baker leaves a flatbread, shaped like a crescent moon. One man lays down a carved wooden comb. Then a tablet reading, for the healing of my brother. May the god hear. Not one of these receipts is expected to be retrieved or enforced in a court. They're symbolic, fragile, even deliberately ephemeral. The temple scribe sees you watching and nods toward a worn niche in the gate wall. Old. Once go there, he murmurs. You walk over. Inside are dozens of weathered tablet edges crumbling, signs half erased by time and rain. But still, they sit there, undisturbed, a quiet, eternal inbox. Fringe fact? Archaeologists have found caches of these ritual tablets buried beneath temple floors, sometimes alongside figurines or beads, evidence that even the gods had archives, or at least places for forgotten prayers. You think back over everything you've seen today, the scribes hunched over their work, the archives humming with memory, the potters grinding up outdated records. Receipts that defended oxen, preserved inheritances, trained generations of students, even accompanied the dead. And now one more roll, offering. A final whisper of thanks written in clay, offered in trust. Historians still debate how the Sumerians truly viewed these tablets. Were they sacred, mundane, legal crutches, or something in between? What's clear is that in summer, a receipt could be more than a transaction. It could be a promise, a vow, a plea, a tribute, a farewell. You glance up at the moon, feel the gentle night wind wrap around your shoulders, and realize you're carrying more than dust on your clothes. You're carrying their voices, not the voices of kings or generals or conquerors, but of shopkeepers, gardeners, bakers, daughters, apprentices, people who lived by the rule of the stylus, people who measured their days in sheep, barley, oil, and hope. People who, without knowing it, taught the world how to remember. You turn from the temple, slowly walking through the sleeping city. Somewhere in the dark, a baby cries, a donkey snorts, a reed mat creaks in the breeze. All of it slips into rhythm with your steps. A lullaby of ancient numbers. A lullaby of clay.